A low, throbbing rumble slips through the darkness before words ever form an unseen tremor, weaving its way into the listener's bones, as if the earth itself exhales a secret into the void. In that pregnant moment of silence, a calm yet urgent voice emerges, slicing through the rumble with a question that sends a chill down the spine. What if these very tremors were foretold nearly a century ago by a sleeping seer? It was 3:42 a.m. on June 5, 2022, when the ground beneath the California coast shuddered violently, waking half the population and shattering glass in silent dawn. Beneath the raw power of a 6.7 magnitude quake lies a deeper mystery. Could such cataclysms be more than random acts of tectonic fury, but echoes of prophecies whispered in a trance? In that tremor, the boundary between myth and measurement flutters like the wavering needle of a seismograph, each spike inviting both wonder and scrutiny. Objectively, seismologists explain it all through fault lines and stress accumulation, plotting every aftershock with clinical precision. Yet when you close your eyes and let the recorder's hiss fade, you can almost hear the distant voice of Edgar Cayce, drifting out of time to warn us of Earth's restless soul. As the rattled survivors ventured into the dawn's gray light dust, still drifting like fallen stars, they carried both data and dread in their pockets, precise magnitudes alongside the unsettling itch that perhaps the planet remembers stories older than recorded history. And so the question lingers, growing louder with each calibrated report: are we merely observers of a planet's slow evolution, or participants in a narrative scripted long ago by a prophet's sleeping lips? In that trembling hush, science and story collide, building toward a climax where every tremor feels like a line in a grand, unfolding drama. A hush falls over the candlelit chamber, as if the air itself awaits a secret, and in that pregnant stillness, a single voice slips through time's veil, a voice that once spoke with uncanny authority from the lips of a quiet Kentucky man. Born in 1877 amid the rolling hills of Hopkinsville, Edgar Cayce was no ordinary soul. He became known as the sleeping prophet when, in his trance-induced slumbers, he delivered visions of destiny and disaster with the clarity of a waking mind. In those half-lit sessions, eyes closed, body utterly still, Cayce drifted beyond the limits of flesh, tapping into an unseen current of knowledge that rippled through his voice with every syllable. Objective records tell us he issued thousands of readings between 1901 and 1944, diagnosing illnesses, unveiling ancient mysteries, and foretelling upheavals that would shake continents. Yet statistics alone cannot capture the hush of all that fell over listeners in the darkened halls of New York and London, nor the collective gasp as his words spoken without notes or notes materialized into headlines and hope. By the 1930s and 40s, a global following had blossomed, scientists scribbling feverishly to verify his medical cures, treasure hunters mapping his clues to lost civilizations, and trembling believers awaiting the next dispatch from his dreaming mind. Scholars still debate how a man could enter a deep hypnotic trance and emerge bearing details of history's hidden seams, but the true measure of his power lay in the fervent faith he ignited. Imagine the crescendo as each prophecy landed in. Newspapers like stones cast into a placid lake, sending concentric rings of wonder outward across the world. And as whispers grew into a tide of curiosity, they carried with them an irresistible question. What truths might this slumbering seer have uncovered about our planet's fate? In that moment of collective breath, holding Cayce's legacy was sealed, poised between myth and measurement, beckoning us to listen. A faint tremor of possibility shivers through the air before a single word is spoken, a whisper of earth changes that unfurls like an ancient scroll across the minds. In the 1930s, Edgar Cayce gave that phrase life, conjuring a vision of our world on the brink of cataclysmic transformation, vast earthquakes cracking the continents, polar ice sheets surrendering to torrential meltwaters, and the very axis of the planet tilting as if nudged by some cosmic hand. Objectively, these prophesied upheavals read like a scientist's checklist: tectonic shifts, rising seas, erratic storms, yet Cayce wove them into a symphony of portent, each prediction rising in tension toward an unseen crescendo. He spoke of continents groaning beneath elemental strain and coastlines drowning under sudden surges, his trance-induced voice carrying the weight of inevitability. Even more unsettling was his insistence that Earth changes would ripple beyond geology, stirring political convulsions and social revolutions as communities clung to shifting shorelines and faltering harvests. Decades later, the term has become a talisman of New Age lore, adopted by mystics sketching new world maps and psychics deciphering the next tremor of destiny. Yet, amidst the crystal balls and satellite readings, Cayce's original urgency remained startling in its breadth. He saw not only the cracks in the ground but the fractures in human hearts, warning that, as the planet remakes itself, so too would our societies be tested. With each passing headline about record heat waves or unprecedented seismic swarms, one can almost hear his voice echoing through time, crescendoing once more. Prepare, for the earth herself remembers ancient rhythms. In that charged silence, where data meets dream, his prophecy still pulses, beckoning us to confront the drama of a world in flux and the choices that will define what emerges from these monumental shifts. A hush settles over the edge of the known world as if the very air is holding its breath. And in that pregnant silence, one can almost hear the echo of Edgar Cayce's most audacious 2025 prophecies, unfurling like a cryptic map etched in the deep. He spoke first of a sudden, spectral tilt in Earth's axis, a pole axis shift so violent that continents would reel on their hinges, oceans pour into craters never before seen, and coastlines redraw themselves in molten motion. Today, geodesists, with satellites and laser precision instruments, assure us that the planet's spin wobbles only by milliseconds each day, what we call the Chandler wobble, offering no hint of the abrupt, world-tilting upheaval Cayce described. Yet, when you trace the lines of Cayce's vision, there's a pulse beneath the numbers, a whispered urgency that science's calm graphs cannot quite silence. He warned next of cataclysm along America's western rim, predicting San Francisco and Los Angeles would be swept away in roaring surges of tectonic violence. Modern seismologists tally an uptick in quakes between 2020 and 2025, roughly 130 events of magnitude 6.0 or greater each year. More than ever before, cataloged but no Hollywood-style ruin has befallen these cities, and the fiercest tremor. In recent memory, a 7.8 in 2021 near Anchorage, Alaska was far from the annihilation foretold. Still, every aftershock sends a ripple of unease through coastal communities and a fleeting spark to the imagination, as if Cayce's pronouncements linger in the subducting plates themselves. Then there is his vision of polar ice giving way, towers of ancient ice caps shattering into the sea, unleashing a flood that would drown fertile deltas and redraw the contours of human habitation. Objective records from NOAA register a steady and accelerating sea level rise of roughly 3 millimeters per year since 2020, amounting to about 15 millimeters in total, an ominous but measured drip rather than a sudden apocalyptic surge. And yet, when storm surges breach seawalls, carrying homes out to sea in a single restless night, one can feel the heartbeat of his warning in every brackish wave. As if the submerged past were clawing its way back into view, Cayce prophesied. The resurfacing of Atlantis itself, vast shelf lands rising from silence, kingdoms lost to time reclaiming the light of day. But the latest marine sediment cores dredged off the Azores bear no sedimentary scars of recent land emergence. They tell a story of gradual deposition, subtle shifts in carbonate chemistry hinting only at acidification, not rebirth. Despite this absence of geological spectacle, the very notion stirs the soul-imagined seafloor plains heaving upward, revealing ruins of an uncanny civilization, stones etched with forgotten glyphs, a testament to humanity's fleeting dance upon the tides of memory. Beyond these grand declarations, Cayce's trance-induced voice ventured into more ephemeral realms. He foresaw mega-solar flares erupting in 2023 and 2024, solar storms so immense that they would blacken skies and sever the electric sinews of modern life. To date, observatories have recorded heightened solar activity, but none approaching the ferocity of a Carrington-scale event. The aurora glimmers in higher latitudes, satellites twitch at charged particle onslaughts, yet the power grids hold firm. Nonetheless, each flicker of geomagnetic unrest in the Earth's magnetic field seems to chant his name, as though the sun itself remembers his trance-born edicts. He spoke too of unprecedented storms ripped from the ether hurricanes climbing to Category 5 strength with savage speed, cyclones ringing the globe in a convulsive fury. Climate scientists note a modest uptick in the most powerful storms, trends that align closely with greenhouse-driven temperature rises and ocean heat content, painting a picture of an atmosphere growing restless under humanity's hand. The data may frame these tempests as predictable outcomes of physics, yet the roar of wind and the obliteration of everything in its path conjure the same thrilling horror in our veins that Cayce's voice once kindled in the hushed parlors of believers. And finally, interwoven with geological and meteorological portents, he hinted at global social upheaval, the specter of pandemics, political revolutions, and cascading unrest that would mirror the Earth's tremors in the human heart. In hindsight, the COVID-19 pandemic and waves of political turbulence across continents seem uncanny echoes of his prediction, though skeptics argue these phenomena fall well within the bounds of historical precedent and statistical probability. Still, it is here, in the overlap of human frailty and planetary force, that Cayce's legacy truly consolidates, not in the precise fulfillment of cataclysmic events, but in our shiver at the conjunction of prophecy and pattern, the moment data, charts, and dreamlike vision resonate together. As each modern check millisecond wobble measured sea rise, quiescent continental shelves meets the soaring cadence of his predictions, we find ourselves suspended between the empirical and the evocative, caught in the tension of a story that refuses to be neatly confined. And in that charged stillness, we are left to ask, what power resides in a dream cast across the bedrock of science? And what will be the next tremor to awaken both our instruments and our deepest unanswered questions? A hush falls over the edges of our understanding as we peer into the unfolding saga of the past 5 years, when the planet's subtle rhythms began to whisper louder truths. First, the Earth herself started to speak in tremors. Between 2020 and 2025, seismographs around the globe recorded an uptick in powerful quakes. Those of magnitude 6.0 or greater surged from roughly 115 per year to about 130. Each jolt a punctuation mark on the planet's brittle crust. Objective analysts point to the Pacific Ring of Fire as the principal stage for these dramas, a fiery arc of volcanoes and faults that never sleeps. Yet the raw tally cannot convey the primal thrill of each aftershock coursing through the ground, nor the collective gasp as city lights flickered in the aftermath. From Tokyo to Santiago, from the Aleutians to the Andes, every tremor felt like a whispered reminder that Earth's seams are always shifting, and that beneath our feet lie restless energies beyond human command. As seismic readings climbed, the world's waters were quietly rising in tandem, as though the seas themselves were responding to subterranean convulsions. Satellite altimeters and tide gauges revealed a global mean sea level increase of about 3.2 millimeters per year between 2021 and 2025, yet in places such as the Western Pacific and parts of the Arctic, local measures spiked to nearly 5 millimeters. Annually enough to nudge shorelines inward, erode once solid beaches, and flood low-lying villages with brackish whispers. Scientists chalk it up to thermal expansion and melting ice sheets, but each coastal inundation, from a spring king tide leaking into a boardwalk cafe to a winter storm surge, flooding a bayou community, carries the same haunting resonance, water advancing like an unbidden guest into rooms we once called home, beneath both land and sea. We turn to the archives of sediment to see if Earth's memory might reveal deeper upheavals, only to find calm continuity. In the deep channels of the North Atlantic, sediment traps gathered particles at rates hovering around 2 to 3 grams per square centimeter each year, a steady drip rather than a cataclysmic deluge. Carbonate shells dissolved just slightly faster than before, a subtle signal of acidifying waters gnawing at microscopic life. But nowhere in those layered seams did We unearth signs of ancient land ripped from the ocean floor or continents re-emerging from slumber. The data are as placid as a wind, stilled fjord, refusing to betray any dramatic resurfacing of forgotten realms, yet the tension between spectacle and statistic breeds its own kind of drama. Each time a tremor rattles a coffee cup, each time seawater laps at a threshold it once spared. We feel the pull of Edgar Cayce's visions, the pulse of prophecy coursing through empirical charts. The numbers stand in silent testimony to gradual shifts. An extra 15 quakes here, a few millimeters of swell there, a minor uptick in sediment chemistry that scholars debate in hushed conference halls. But for those attuned to the planet's subtler narratives, these modest changes coalesce into a crescendo, a slow burn apocalypse that unfolds not in a single cataclysmic moment but in the aggregate weight of countless small events. In the stillness between data points, one can almost hear the Earth's murmured counsel that change need not roar to be monumental, that the most profound transformations often come as incremental truths whispered into our instruments before they break through into collective awareness. And as we compile our seismic graphs, our sea level curves, our sedimentary logs, we find ourselves enmeshed in a story that oscillates between the cold precision of science and the warm glow of mystery, a tale where every jitter on a seismometer, every extra millimeter of tide, every grain of sediment becomes a word in a grander narrative. In this unfolding chronicle of 5 years, the climax is not a singular moment of ruin but the dawning realization that our world is perpetually in flux, and that in listening closely to its subtle cadences, we stand on the cusp of understanding both its past whispers and its future roar. A shadow falls between dream and datum, where Cayce's grand visions brush against the cold clarity of modern measurement, and in that liminal space the true drama unfolds. He prophesied polar caps shattering, coastlines rewoven by watery fingers, and continents drifting like slow, melting ice sculptures, and on the surface, seismographs and tide gauges seem to temper his fervor with their unblinking digits. Yet, dive deeper, and you find moments where his trance-born foresight nearly aligns with emerging patterns, the uptick in powerful quakes, the steady creep of sea level rise, the whisper of acidifying currents in our deepest trenches. Objectively, scientists chalk these shifts up to tectonic cycle averages and greenhouse-driven thermal expansion, plotting precise curves and error bars to explain every fraction of a millimeter or each incremental case increase in seismic events. But when these objective curves spike when a tsunami warning flashes red, or a city braces for its 100th tremor, the echoes of Cayce's decade, old forecasts resonate through our collective nerves, sending a chill that no statistical model can quite dispel. It is here, between the prophecy that overshoots with apocalyptic grandeur and the data that often understates with cautious restraint, that human psychology unfurls its own narrative. We hunger for patterns in the chaos, stitching vague predictions into a quilt of seeming confirmation, cherry-picking post-quake headlines or flood stories to vindicate a sleeping seer's cryptic utterances. The result is a tension-filled tapestry, numbers weighed against words, charts pinned against whispered oracles, and listeners caught in the thrilling suspense of uncertainty. As the earth hums its subtle warnings, each jitter in a fault line, each extra millimeter of tide, our minds leap to fill the gaps, driven by an ancient longing for portent and by the rational urge to understand. In that charged moment of suspended disbelief, prophecy and data merge into a single, breath-holding question. What truths lie hidden in the spaces where science ends and imagination begins? A hush settles over our collective consciousness as the echoes of ancient dreams drift through the corridors of memory, reminding us of a bygone golden age we yearn to reclaim even as we tremble at the thought of impending collapse. In the half-light of reflection, Edgar Cayce's grand visions of Earth's upheaval become more than prophecy. They are mirrors held up to our deepest anxieties and aspirations. Objectively, science strides in with its precise instrument satellites that measure each millimeter of rising sea, seismographs that record every micro-shift in the crust translating the planet's subtle, mutterings into graphs and data tables that Cayce could never have drawn in Trance. Yet those sterile curves and error bars cannot capture the ache of loss for drowned shorelines or the awe inspired by a world moving underfoot, nor can they soothe the thrill of gazing into the misty realm of the unknown. In this charged interplay between memory and reality we find our true story, one where prophecy and data dance in tandem, each lending the other depth and resonance. Cayce's whispered urgings beckon us to listen for patterns in the quake's aftershock and to feel the poetry in every drop of melting ice, while science demands we verify, quantify, and understand. The real drama unfolds in the tension between these poles, our ancient longing for narrative meaning and our modern insistence on empirical truth. And from this union emerges the essential takeaway that, whether delivered through a sleeping prophet's voice or the digital hum of a supercomputer, both prophecy and data seek to tell the same tale of a world in flux, and it is up to us to decode their entwined messages before the next tremor wakes us from our half-remembered dreams. A hush of anticipation drapes over the horizon as if the planet itself is holding its breath, beckoning us to become vigilant witnesses to its unfolding story. Imagine, just beyond the next sunrise, the ground quivering underfoot, tides inching a fraction higher against ancient seawalls, and satellite eyes capturing the planet's subtle heartbeat in real time, each tremor and swell a living sentence in Earth's epic narrative. Now, picture yourself at the center of this grand experiment, notebook in hand, eyes peeled for every seismic spike and millimeter of sea level change, charting the slow crescendo that might one day reveal the most dramatic of Cayce's trance-born visions. Yet this is no passive ritual of prophecy. It is a call to wield curiosity like a finely tuned instrument, to interrogate every data point with the sharp edge of skepticism and the open heart of wonder. In the age of data, we can track storms by their carbon footprints and map tectonic stress with laser precision tools Cayce could only dream of. So let us use them not to disprove the dream, but to enrich it, measuring our myths against Mother Nature's ledger. Over the next 5 years, as the earth mutters and quakes and whispers in rising seas, we will be both chroniclers and critics, weaving together the poetic tension between ancient foresight and modern measurement. And when the next headline proclaims an unprecedented quake or a record-breaking flood, we will already know whether it fulfills a century-old utterance from a sleeping prophet or simply marks another turn in our planet's relentless, measurable dance. So lean in, listener. Take up your instruments, tune your questions, and join this audacious quest to decode Earth's next great chapter, where every number tells a story and every story begs for a number.